What is going on, y'all? KMBest here, your favorite 69th ranked Marvel snapper with a new off-meta special. Now, I know the metagame is pretty new. We only really know that Thanos is very good, and Black Knight is very good, and Loki seems to be a lot worse than it previously was, so saying something is off-meta now may not be true in even as short a time period as a week. However, this is an off-meta deck after my own heart. It has everything I want in a deck right now. It has powerful game plans, it has solid tech pieces, and most importantly, it has an Annihilus package that goes alongside another very powerful plan. This one was put together by YoWoody, so let's jump into the deck breakdown. I am joined by YoWoody, who put this deck together, and first things first, I just want to say this is a deck after my own heart, by which I mean it's a Hood, Annihilus, Sentry deck. I love that mid-range package right now, but also I mean it's a deck that uses Werewolf, plays a lot of cards on the final turn of the game. There's some tricky stuff you could do with Yellow Jacket and Annihilus. There's just a bunch of weird amounts of play in this deck. Plus, it's fundamentally just a points backed up by tech deck, and I really enjoy that. So, YoWoody, welcome to the channel. What was your ethos in creating this deck? How did you go about it? And what exactly sets this deck apart from other decks in the type? I consider it a bit of a bounceless bounce list. It plays like bounce, but there's no actual bounce in it. And it does that by virtue of the Thors and the one drops and all of that stuff. So walk me through the ethos of it.
Well, I would say that the main thing that sets this list apart from specifically a bounce list is that, like, on turns 5 and, like, even, like, turns 4 and 5 mainly are what is playing it different than a bounce list, because bounce, a lot of the times on turns 4 and 5, is trying to, put the small cards back in their hand and re-trigger their abilities and play them back to the board. And I feel like it's just, like, way too slow to do that against like stuff like Thanos and Black Knight, when what you really need to be doing is putting down like solid threats on the board, like Thor, Werewolf, Sentry Annie, like stuff that actually gives them things that they need to consider and start placing their power down where they think they need it early. That way on turn 6, instead of just like replaying everything you played that turn and like granular power to each lane, which is like a way of beating Blob that Bounce and this deck both have, which is just like going wide and playing for all three.
Yeah.
But it's way harder with Bounce because like your power is way more granular and you have less just like big fat stat sticks. Like this deck is really good at just putting out like power where it's like, okay, you need to Devil Dino this lane on 5 because you need to set up for your Blob lane on 6. It's not like when you bounce your power back to your hand, it can kind of be detrimental to you if the Thanos player is playing into a lockdown location, or they're gonna leech you or something like that. You just want to have like actual threatening cards on the board early, which I feel like is something that this deck does that Bounce kind of has struggled with for me.
Okay, so you view this as a sort of metagame based adaptation, then, where this is just like a lot of the top decks. And I think we can fairly say that right now there are really two decks that stand out. They're Thanos and Black Knight. And both of those decks involve wildly powerful turn sixes that go very, very tall, but not necessarily very tall in multiple places. The Black Knight nut draw, of course, you can do like Ghost Rider and Ebony Blade, but most of the time it ends up being one or the other on the final turn, along with perhaps a piece of tech. Whereas, of course, we all know Thanos and Blob is just, you have to play for 3 lanes because Blob is going to win one, and that's sort of the general threat here. But there's a degree to which Black Knight plays like that as well. And so you view this as an upgrade in a metagame sense. Do you view it as an upgrade in a strict sense, or is this something the metagame has forced upon the archetype?
I mean, I don't know if I would call it like a strict upgrade. I definitely think it's at least as good as Bounce because they both share the characteristic of, even though Bounce is better at doing it than this list, is like holding your big turn 6 flourish. Like they can both do that where you're playing like setup, but this deck setup is different. It's either Annihilus or Jane or something similar to that, and then you vomit your hand, you vomit your zero cost cards, you make the wolf jump, you play a tech card or two on the last turn. You know, they can both do that really well, but something that this list uh, has over Bounce is that since it's not as tight in terms of like the 12 cards, because Bounce is like a historically extremely tight list.
Yeah.
It's easier to fit in flex slots. Like I would consider like Spider Ham, Mobius, Enchantress. Like these cards are like kind of cards that are hard to fit in like a raw Bounce list. Like all of them, because a lot of the time you're like, oh, I want Enchantress, but I also want Spider Ham, but it's really hard to run Spider Ham if you also want to run like Shadow King or something like that. And a deck like this, where it's just like more trying to curve out your cards instead of bounce them back to your hand over and over again, is just going to be less tight in terms of like the combo piece slots and have more flex slots than bounce. And then also, I think that another thing that this list does better than bounce is, like I said, it just forces your opponent to make more decisions throughout the course of the game than bounce does, because on bounce a lot of the time I feel like it's like it's like the opposite of Thanos, where it's like Thanos is like, nothing you did in this lane matters because I'm just gonna blob it on turn 6. And then Bounce is like, everything you're doing before turn 6 matters a shit ton, but then on turn 6 when you're sitting there with your zero cost cards in your hand and your opponent has a shit ton of power on the board, it's up to you to be like, well, I don't think I can win, or I'm just gonna play all of my cards and win. But a lot of the time it's more face up than bounce, because your opponent has like pretty much seen your turn 6 in bits and pieces throughout the course of the game, where this list I feel like is a lot more, I don't know, it has more like surprise factor in the kinds of explosive turn 6s it can have, because of like the Jane Foster or Annihilus stuff feels like it's teeing you up for like a lot of unexpected stuff on 6, where bounce, it's like, I don't know, it's just harder to get over the top of a lot of big stuff without your opponent like knowing exactly what you're going to do on the final turn with bounce, because it is a little bit face up.
Yeah, I mean, there's a degree to which this deck is face up, in the sense that, like, if you play a Jane, they know you have a Mjolnir, things like that. They know you
Mm-hmm.
drew X cards off the Jane. They know you have uh probably at least a demon once you've played the Hood. They know you're likely
Mm-hmm.
an Annihilus deck. They know things like that, but they don't know, for example, what you've chosen for your Enchantress slot, what your other one drop for disruption is. I've seen Iceman in here, and I think that's
Mm-hmm.
also like a totally reasonable thing given how many decks are trying to do very specific curves on you right now. Mobius makes a ton of sense in here, but it could very much be anything else. Like, this could easily be like a Shang plus Enchantress deck if you didn't want to play Mobius. And so you have all these like various options on the final turn of the game. And crucially, every single one of them moves werewolf, from Mjolnir to Yellow Jacket. They all move the werewolf. And I think that's like an underrated piece of the deck, is that Jane Foster is drawing you effectively 4 extra werewolf power and 6 extra Thor power every time you play her. And like, not every time, but like when you draw her in the good scenarios, that's what she's doing. And that's a very powerful thing to do. Now, I did want to jump into asking some specific questions about the cards, so let's do that. Everyone's gonna ask about this guy, so just tell me about the Yellow Jacket. This is the card in here that everyone's gonna be like, all right, okay, you've gone too far. What's going on here? Why are we playing Yellow Jacket? And I've alluded to a couple of the reasons that I understand. It can be drawn with Jane Foster. It has an on-reveal ability to pump Werewolf. You use its ability to send over like a Spider Ham or something if you can, but like, now that he doesn't move over zero cost cards, I feel like that got a lot worse, if that makes any
Mm-hmm.
sense. So you're mostly only doing it on like, the Hood or a Void. Previously, I was like kind of into this as a way to send over like Spider Ham or Forge or whatever. For the record, we don't run Forge in here because we're not a bounce deck and that's a bounce card. But that is like something that I thought of, where it's like, huh, so this guy is a little bit worse than he used to be. Why is he worth running?
All right, so Yellow Jacket definitely did get like, he did get hit the most probably in this deck out of the Annie nerf, because previously you could like send over, Spider Ham is like the gimme. That's like a
Yeah.
lot of the reason that I had Yellow Jacket and Spider Ham in the deck, was because you can you can Annihilus over Spider-Ham to a lane where like your opponent has a 1-drop or a Blade or something and shut off their Miss Marvel, and it's super good. But you can't do that anymore, which sucks. You could also do it with like Central Park Squirrels or the Raptors from Savage Land or something like that. But you cannot anymore, which is sad, but I still think that Yellow Jacket is like one of the cards in this deck that I would not cut for probably anything else. I think he still belongs in the deck. He is still very strong, and he has a lot of different use cases besides just doing that, even though that might have been his strongest use case. Like, he is super good when combined with Nico Minoru.
Yeah.
Another card in this deck. He's like the freest, like, kill me to draw 2 cards or turn me into a demon, or even if you want to just like your Nico got hit by Wakandan Embassy or something, or you just want to get like the value from Nico early, so you want to play another card after her to double her power to fight for priority or something like that. He's like a super good Nico activator, especially early game when you haven't played your cards out yet and he's not negatively afflicting anything. And he's also still just really solid for, like you said, moving Werewolf. He's really good for if he's in your deck and you play Jane on 5, she's going to draw him from your deck, which means that you're effectively thinning your deck. So you're going to go into like if you're going into like a 1 in 3 or 1 in 4 to draw Annie in the last turn, it's going to turn into a 1 in 3. Same thing with like if you're reaching for Enchantress or something like that, like a really important piece in what your board state is, whether it's a tech card or you're just trying to get the Annihilus off. So he gives you a better chance. He actually gives you more consistency, even though it's like rare that he's in your deck while you're playing Jane. It still comes up frequently, and it's really nice to be able to thin your deck like that and have more consistency, because the deck has like a lot of smaller, like 2 to 3 card combos. That he helps enable more consistently, and then you can also play him late game to, make the Hood a -4, send him over with Annihilus, make the Mjolnir. I like doing this a lot, I don't know why, but you can make the Mjolnir -1 and send it over with Annihilus. Yeah.
Yeah. We got a
That's pretty
0
cool.
cost. We got a 0 power guy. Yeah. It makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
For sure.
And he's also has a small little technique that you can do with him where you play him on to Sentry after you've played Sentry down for effectively
yes.
1 point in that lane, but it's reducing a point of power from your 10 power Sentry, which makes him immune to Shang-Chi, which has actually come up for me like maybe 4 or 5 times over the course of me playing the deck just after like the patch. So I think it is a legitimate strategy you can use with this deck.
Now, I have often said Sentry would be stronger if he was a 4/9, and this is an unconventional way of going about it, but it is definitely not something to ignore. Let's talk turkey, or should I say ham. Spider Ham is a card that I know you have a higher opinion of than basically anyone else I've ever met. So tell me why Spider Ham makes sense over other disruptive pieces now that the Annihilus Yellow Jacket synergy is removed. Like, why should I play this instead of Iceman? Why should I play this instead of, whatever other 1-drop in the deck, or really whatever other card?
So Spider-Ham, like right now at least, in like the thick of the Black Knight Thanos big shit meta, is kind of he's definitely riskier than he would normally be. Like, you're picking a lot a lot more Infinauts and Gladiators and Maximuses than you used to be. But at the same time, I still think that since this deck is kind of like the reason to choose this deck over a more traditional bound shell is because it's well positioned into like the more meta monsters like matchups. I think Spider-Ham is still worth it because he a lot of times is your way of winning the matchups that you are less familiar with. Like he can be a really good cheese tool versus like a destroy deck or a living tribunal deck, even if you have Enchantress. He's another way of disrupting them and forcing them out early if you don't draw it, or like a Mr. Negative deck. Or I just like Spider-Ham because he can cover single-handedly matchups where your tech doesn't really fit. Like if your opponent's playing Destroy, I feel like, is the biggest one, but it can also be good versus like even the more meta decks. Like, there are good Spider-Ham hits in like a Black Knight deck, like if you pick their Sarah or their Ghost Rider or maybe their Blade or you pick a Thanos Dex Blob or
Yeah.
their Lockjaw, like stuff like that are actual good targets in these meta decks. It's just he is more risky than he normally is. I would say he is like a flex slot if you're not finding a lot of success with him. You could swap him out for something like Iceman or Shadow King if you need them. But I still think he's worth it just because he's a one drop on reveal. You know, moves werewolf. You can combo him with like a 3 or 4 if you have Zabu down to move the werewolf twice, and he does just like single-handedly win games sometimes, which I really like and still think has value in this meta, especially when there's so much like there's like the big 3 decks, and then outside of that, it's kind of like you never really know what you're gonna run into. So I think he's like
Yeah.
a Swiss Army knife of a one drop.
Let's talk about the Thor package, and this can be, Jane plus Thor conversation. I have Thor on the screen, but that they're both Thor at this point. So let's talk about it. So I know you've been messing around with various packages involving other 5 drops in this list. I think this is the one that's the most compelling to me. Could you tell me why it ended up being the most compelling to you?
Yeah, I mean, I messed around with some Black Bolt stature stuff before and like this Annihilus type of package. I also had Silver Samurai in it, so it's like Black Bolt stature, Silver Samurai over Thor, Jane, and probably another tech card. But that just felt kind of clunky because if you're playing like a game plan based around 2 5 drops and a 4 drop, your curve is just naturally
Yeah,
fat. Like
it's
it's
bad.
super heavy. You draw a lot of dead draws a lot of the time, and it feels like more of like a high roll deck, even though you're playing like mid range power, because
Hmm.
you have to like stay on those 50 percenters where you draw like your really strong early game.
Yeah, and if
Whereas
you're
this
gonna be
deck,
that, like, you might as well just play Black Knight, right? Like, if you're
yeah,
gonna
yeah,
be a
exactly.
high roll mid
Yeah.
range deck, like, if there's one already, and it's probably better.
Yeah, it didn't feel as bad until like Black Knight and Thanos was just like we're just doing that better. So like
Yeah,
there's no point in it anymore. So Thor and Jane, you still have a 5 drop, but you cut, the other combo piece which is stature for a 3 drop, which is feels insanely good in a Zabu deck to have a 3 drop that you want to play on curve because if you don't hit the Zabu, you have like a nice transition from early to mid to late game. And Thor is like the perfect on curve 3 drop. You play him, set him up, and then Jane the Mjolnir and the Yellow Jacket out of your deck. It's like another super strong 2 card on reveal combo, stronger even than the Sentry Annihilus package in terms of like facilitating the werewolf specifically.
yes. Okay.
Like you
Like,
can
if you had
fit.
the choice, here's a question. Would you
Mhm.
rather go Thor Werewolf Jane or Thor Sentry Annihilus?
I would say it depends on what I have in my hand, but like if I have a Nihilus, Sentry, Jane, and Thor in my hand, I like playing out Jane Thor first. And then I save a Nihilus a lot of time for turn 6 because like
Yeah,
obviously Jane you have to play her on 5 if you want to get the value from the on reveal, unless you're playing against like a Darkhawk deck or something, but if you want to get Mjolnir and Yellow Jacket like usable in your hand on turn 6, you have to play Jane on 5. And a lot of like the really strong decks right now are not great at like just burst filling a lane. So it's kind of like a play it by ear type thing. But like if the Thanos player, they played Lockjaw mid or left and they haven't really put a bunch of their stones in the right lane, like a lot of the time you can just be comfortable holding your Annihilus until turn 6 because you're like, yeah, I mean, Thanos is not gonna just play 3 cards to the right lane on turn 6 when they haven't
sure.
been playing stones all game or something like that. Same thing with Black Knight. So I think that uh Jane is like I prioritize Jane on turn 5 most games because she's just really good at moving werewolf. But if werewolf isn't on the board and you have the sentry thing set up and an Annihilus in hand, you can maybe go that route. But
It's more that, like, what we're getting at here is Jane Thor should be understood as part of the werewolf package, or werewolf should be
mhm,
understood as part of that package, and then the Annihilus package is a little bit separate from that. Like, there are two main game plans here, one of which is, Jane Thor werewolf, the other one is Annihilus Sentry, and both of them are viable end games.
yeah. And Thor, he really like if you want to guaranteed get value from him, he is part of a 2-card combo. But he's still good if you hit like Zabu into Werewolf, and then you play like Thor on 4 plus a 1-drop. He's just nice to have a on reveal card in your hand that you can combo with a 1-drop on 4 that's not Sentry, because sometimes it feels a little bit risky to play out your Sentry if you don't have the Annihilus in hand. Especially against a Thanos deck. Like, if you don't have the Annihilus in hand, a lot of the times I just don't play out Sentry unless I can fill the right lane, and a good method of doing that is like jump Werewolf right and then Sentry, so that when Werewolf fills the right lane, the Void doesn't go over, but then the Sentry pulls him back out.
Yeah.
And I like doing that if I don't have a Nihilus against a Thanos deck, because it's really risky to just set up a dead lane versus a Thanos deck. And
Yeah.
Thor just he helps you facilitate those kinds of plays by just being an on reveal dude that, even if you don't draw the Jane, can give you an on reveal 0-drop at some point in the game.
Talk to me a little bit about the Mobius choice here, because my instincts are all screaming at me that, at least in this metagame with Lockjaw Blob Thanos and Black Knight everywhere, that Loki is kind of dead. So this then is for a different matchup, and my instinct is it's for Black Knight, right? Like, that's what this is for. It's so that Black Knight can't do its thing. Am I correct about that?
Yeah, Mobius is definitely like a targeted tech against Black Knight specifically. Obviously, he gets a little tiny bit of utility in the Thanos matchup if they're running wave and you can get him down early
Yeah.
enough.
Or Scar, or
But
whatever.
yeah, Scar too. Yeah, Scar he's pretty decent against. But like outside of that, he's gonna have like fringe use cases. But he mostly is for Black Knight. But he's also, people are still playing Loki, even though I don't think it's that great. He
Yeah.
is good against Loki, really good against Loki. And once again, he's like a curve filler. If you don't draw Zabu, you can play him on 3, just like set him down. You're still doing something. He still, a lot of the times, has like good, location, specifically for, what's that? Dream Dimension, is that the one
Yeah.
where you,
Yes.
yeah,
The worst
Dream
location in the
Dimension,
entire game. Everyone hates it.
yeah,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
yeah, it fucks the deck up because you have 2 like
Yeah, the
powerhouse
5s, you
5-drops.
need them. Yeah.
Yeah. So he's nice for that. And he could definitely be like a flex slot. I was playing Jeff in his spot before, but I think right now Mobius is just pretty good. And the reason I was playing Jeff is because there was like a lot of lockdown, and this deck kind of struggled into lockdown with this Sentry and Annihilus stuff, but there's like barely any lockdown anymore. So I think Mobius is just fine. He counters Sarah, he counters Wave, he counters Loki. He's good if you're playing a bounce deck, because this deck is it can get out high rolled by Bounce pretty easily, but if
Yeah.
you have the Mobius down, I think you can keep up with them. So it's another helpful piece in that matchup. Yeah, that's mainly his role. Just like targeted meta specific tech right now, I think he's pretty good, and you can flex him out if you don't need him. But right now, for where I'm at, I think he belongs here.
So, any final words of advice to someone who has never played this deck and wants to pick it up? Anything that they should keep an eye on in terms of habits? Anything specific to this deck that you would think that maybe would go under the radar? I know we've talked a little bit about like the various packages that construct the deck and the yellow jacket tech stuff. Is there anything else in that vein?
Um, I mean, the only real advice that I would give to people is like, don't be afraid to hold your Annihilus and get the Jane out early, like we were talking about. Like, a lot of the times, players who are playing decks like this with like a 2-card combo that's very well known, like Sentry Annihilus or something like that, really, like, if they're going into the deck for the first time, it's kind of the thing that they like fixate on, because it's like the most intuitive part of the deck. Is like, oh, it's Sentry Annihilus, so I'll play Sentry and Annihilus. But I think the main the main win condition for this deck is like setting up and solidifying each of your threats as best as you can. So like, you have like your stat stick cards, your lane carry, like big threats in a lane, which is Thor, Werewolf, and then the Sentry can be 2 if you draw Annihilus, because you have the Sentry and the Void to worry about. But Annihilus is more like, since his nerf, I think that his one of his most the most powerful parts about the card, sorry, are the void does not need to be immediately sent over to hold value, because it will change how your opponent plays the game just having the void sitting in the right lane. And you can make use of it a lot of the time. If you just don't Annie early, you can get like more use out of it, because if they commit there on 5 and you still don't drop the Annie, then they want to commit even more there on 6, and it helps you like that's kind of the beauty of this deck, is that like Werewolf combined with Sentry and Annihilus really does help Werewolf, because it's an on reveal, like 2-card on reveal combo, extremely strong, but also it helps you see where your opponent is committing like way easier and decide where your Werewolf is going to end at the end of the game.
Makes perfect sense. All right. Thank you so much, YoWoody. Remember, everyone who made it this far in the video, check the description for where you can find more content from YoWoody. Spoiler alert, it's on Twitch. You can find it. He streams. He's there. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Everyone who made it this far, I've been KMBest. You've been phenomenal. That's been YoWoody, and I will see you in the next one.